should see this. Okay, okay. Hello, this is round number 4, prepared motion of the Campionato Giovanile Italiano di Dibattito in English, okay? And we have Piemonte, Antonelli, right? And we have Abruzzi, Liceo Classico D'Annunzio, right? As proposition and opposition. And the motion is the following one. This house would require all foods already on the market to undergo the European safety assessment currently mandated for novel foods. Infoslide. EU rules define novel foods, as any food that was not consumed significantly in the EU before May 1997, when the EU's first regulation on novel food came into force. Okay? Please, I am Fabrizio Thierry and the chair judge, and I would like my two judges to introduce themselves. Thank you.
Carlo Nicola Colacino. I'm not hearing. I thought the other judge was going to talk first. Carlo Nicola Colacino, and I wish you a happy afternoon and a good debate.
Hello, my name is Maria Lucia Ciancio, and I also give you the best wishes for the best debate.
Okay. Any question? Everything is all right? So, if everything is okay, we can start with the debate. And please, first speaker for proposition team, Laura, please take the floor. Thank you.
Okay, everybody can hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. And I just want to say that I would rather take my POIs from opening your microphone, and I'm speaking for the whole team. We all prefer that. Thank you. Okay, so if everybody is ready, I will start in 3, 2, 1. Just because my grandma ate it, it doesn't mean it won't make me sick. Welcome to the 21st century. Time to test our food like we actually care about our health. So I would like to start by giving some definition. European Safety Assessment for Novel Foods is a standardized pre-market scientific evaluation conducted by the European Food Safety Authority, EFSA, assessing eventual short-term damages, nutritional impact, interaction with other substances, and exposure level across different populations, and food that are already on the market. All food products currently sold in the EU, including those introduced before May 1997, that have never undergone an EU-level safety assessment. Pro House believes that historical consumption is not a sufficient proof of safety. The EU current distinction between novel food and all other food is not grounded in science, but in outdated legacy. Thus, it's essential to apply the best measure to guarantee the same level of food safety across novel and not novel food. Since 1990, our understanding of toxin, microplastic, allergenicity, and packaging has radically evolved. Substances that we do not know existed, like for example nanoplastic, are now recognized as potential health risks. So what is the problem? The problem behind believing that long-term consumption proves safety is methodologically flawed. Historical use provides risk and incomplete evidence, while scientific safety can solve the problem, since it required controlled, systematic, and population-wide analysis. Historical consumption lacks control condition. Historical consumption does not provide the high-level test that scientific testing can. On the other hand, provide. Making people eat in different quantities in different contexts with different health profiles make it impossible for historical consumption testing to isolate the effect of a single food, establish those responsible relationship, and identify cumulative or low-level harms. Without controlled exposure data, harms that are small per individual but large at population scale remain invisible. Many harms are chronic, delayed, or cumulative. A food can cause harm without producing immediate or obvious symptoms. As an example, trans fats are consumed for decades without acute toxicity, yet later proven to significantly increase cardiovascular diseases. So the later harms do not trigger historical alarm because they overlap with other diseases and affect only specific group of population. So continuing to rely on historical assumption means ignoring decades of scientific progress. Historical diets are not modern diets. Even if a food was once safe in a historical condition, this does not guarantee safety today. Things have changed. We have now higher consumption frequency, larger portion size, and industrial processing. So increased exposure transform a low-risk substance into a high-risk one, like licorice, invalidating conclusion based on historical use. And scientific standards evolve. Modern toxicology now identifies risks that were previously undetectable, like endocrine disruption. So we believe that historical consumption cannot be considered valid proof of food safety. So what is our model? As the motion states, PRO wants to require all food already on the market to undergo the European safety assessment currently mandated. So the policy applies to all food products currently sold in the EU that have not undergone the full EFSA safety assessment. So foods remain on the market unless evidence of risk emerge, protecting the consumers and the sellers. When introduce a phase and risk-based reassessment system, meaning that to avoid regulatory overload, reassessment happens in phases using risk prioritization, while still requiring eventual assessment for all food. So this system will avoid EFSA from being overworked and will guarantee a regulation that won't fall apart, no thank you, due to time urges. So, and then adapted novel food assessment pathway. All foods undergo the novel food assessment, but the depth of assessment is proportional to risk. How does proportionality works? Food with strong preliminary safety data move through simplified assessment. Food with higher uncertainty requires full toxicologically dossier. So they will also reviewing and update mechanism. Reassessment are periodically updated as science evolves. So the new scientific evidence triggers targeted re-evaluation. So the system becomes dynamic, evolving through time. So what is our first point? Is that the mandatory assessment significantly increase consumer safety and protection? No, thank you. What are the grounding of this argument? Regulation for food has existed for over a century and it has proven to significantly increase people's health. However, these regulations are not useful if they're updated. Let's take an example. Like school systems have made some changes in their rules throughout the years. Why? Because the environment around it has changed. Technology has evolved, and they needed to take in account. The same things goes for food. Today, there are different risks from the one that were years ago. So there is nothing that stops the risk from damaging people just because they ate something that is not considered novel. So why is applying the regulation used for novel food to all categories the best solution? Modern science reveals real safety gaps in what considers all food. Food existing before 1997 were approved under a completely different scientific framework. Nowadays, the production of many SD food has changes. Even if the food is the same, the way it's produced is completely different. Therefore, no thank you. It's essential to update the safety test that can now go through. A plant traditionally consumed in small quantity can now be extracted, concentrated, isolated, and inserted into many products simultaneously. So the result is no longer the same food in terms of exposure. It is scientifically inconsistent to apply modern standards only to new food and to ignore old ones, even though they are now produced and consumed in radically different ways. I can take a POI now. No, thank you. Okay.
No,
This
yeah,
food,
actually, yeah.
yes.
So are you aware of the fact that there are regulations right now, they are dynamic and that do evolve and that do address these problems? So actually there's no such thing as having novel foods, having dynamic new situations, but there's also a framework by the European Union that's already present and dynamic as well for every single food on the market.
Of course, there are some regulation. What we are taking into account is to take this kind of regulation and applying it to novel food, saving times because we don't have to go through new rules. We have just to take a rule that works, as I explained before, and just apply to foods that were not considered novel before. So these foods were never subjected to this exhaustive EFESA procedure that we rely on today. Let's take an example. Like corn is a traditional non-novel food, but today it can contain new or increased toxins that were not relevant 30 years ago, such as fumarins and other emerging mycotoxins. So changes in climate, farming practices, and fungal ecology have altered the types of level of toxin. This shows that even long-established food needs safety change. So since the testing will be so much more safe, it will take in account new possible risks, keeping a modern and updated testing. This is crucial since it will lead to new products that will be safer and actually more control and avoiding encountering health damaging conditions without our realizing. Thank you. That's the end of my speech.
8 minutes. Okay. Carlo and Maria, are you okay? Yes, you are okay. So, Martina, first speaker from opposition team, please.
Okay, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Hello everyone, I'm the first speaker of the opposition team, and I would like to start by saying that we accept the definition provided by the proposition team. However, it is crucial to clarify how the European food safety system actually works, so as to understand the severe consequences that supporting this motion would bring. In fact, EFSA's role is limited to scientific risk assessment. It analyzes the data submitted and paid for by the single industries and identifies potential hazards. However, the authorization of foods lies with the European Commission through a separate political and administrative process that is widely recognized as lengthy. But why this matters? Because this institutional reality assumes a level of speed and capacity that this system does not have. I would also like to rebut something that the first speaker of the proposition said, for example, that their model improves consumer trust. But that is actually not true, because with their model, people would still see that, because many of the problems that they mention are not caused by the chemical composition of a food, but how a food is handled. For example, how it is conserved, its supply chain. So the problem, it is not only the chemical composition. Moreover, their model it is lengthy and costly, and it would let the small businesses collapse. And so people would lose trust in all the system, which is way worse. Moreover, they said that history of consumption doesn't matter. However, we do not agree with this statement, because many of foods of the in the market have decades, at least 30 years, which is not a short period of time, or even century of safe consumption behind them. So if a common relevant chemical risk exists, the population would have found out and the EU would have intervened. We do agree also that the chemicals, the products can change, that also their method of production can change. But this concern is already fully addressed within the existing European regulatory framework. In fact, under EU Regulation 2015-2283 on novel food, any food that is produced using a new process, contains new ingredients, or undergoes a significant change that may affect its safety is automatically classified as a novel food. So reassessing all food, it is unnecessary. I'll rebut more things later on, but I would like firstly to say that we do agree that the status quo is not perfect, but we believe that the proposition team is addressing the issue with an unrealistic and harmful approach, because not all foods are dangerous and not all contexts are the same. So a one-size-fits-all solution is a waste of energy, time, and money that could be better invested into an approach that is more realistic and effective, one that actually impacts the status quo for the better. So we win this debate in the moment we prove to you how the proposition strategy causes more harm than good. The metric in this debate will be safety, economic fairness. Yes.
Sorry, but you said it before that there are already regulation for all food that we don't need more regulation. But now you're telling me that you need more regulation. So you're saying that the old regulation don't actually work as well as you think. Please engage with that.
I said that the status quo could be improved by improving the regulation that already exists. But I will explain it later on. I will now tell you our team line, and then I will explain this aspect more in depth. I'm going to talk about in my first argument about how a universal real assessment would overload and ultimately collapse the entire system, while the second speaker is going to give us two arguments. The first one is about unfairness to small businesses and consumers, and the third one is about the misdiagnosis of the main source of food safety risk. As I said, we believe that the status quo is not perfect, so we would like to propose a way to improve it by strengthen and fully enforce the EU framework that already apply to all foods already on the market to make them more efficient, instead of overworking an assessment tailored specifically for a small category of foods. In fact, the EU food law that already exists, shared across all member states, ensure safety. And this general food law is enforced through the official control regulation that monitor how food is produced and processed, hygiene condition, storage and temperature control, transport and distribution, labeling and traceability. So unlike their model, unlike EFSA style assessment that focuses mainly on the chemical composition of a food, the EU official controls look at the real world supply chain, where many of the biggest dangers actually happens, because they say that we need to improve the safety system due to the problems, for example, of packaging, climate, and other problems they mentioned. However, most of those problems are not caused by the chemical composition, and they only solve this problem, but are caused by all the supply chain. So as they mentioned, the packaging, the environment, how it is conserved. So for this reason, we would like to implement the already existing norms by making controls more frequent and using a risk-based approach, focusing on high-risk food, so to not waste time. And when controls find serious risk, we would intervene. So our model is better because it targets the full sets of risk. Now I'll quickly move on to my first argument because I'm running out of time. I would just like to say that with their model, EFSA would collapse, because as I said, the European system is only capable of completing a very limited number of full EFSA style assessment per year. So assessing every single food, no matter how which method the proposition proposed, would be impossible. Moreover, it would be temporary because even if such a universal assessment could be completed in the shortest time possible, its result would be temporary because scientific knowledge, as they said, evolves constantly. So the proposition team is chasing hypothetical risk instead of preventing real ones. And with that, I will conclude my speech.
8 minutes and 24 seconds. Okay, Maria and Carlo, you okay? Very good. So we can go to the second speaker from proposition team, and she is Cecilia. Okay, very good.
Everyone can hear me? Okay. So my speech will start in 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, first of all, why would your counter model work, taking the fact that you didn't mechanize it, and also that your structure would be, your model would work and proportionality in your way on your line of explanation would work, whereas in ours won't. But why? You didn't explain it. As my first speaker brought in the whole model that was brought and was layered in different parts to introduce proportionality and the fact that our system won't bring overload because we'll introduce, as my first speaker said, a phased and risk-based assessment system, meaning to avoid regulatory overload, the assessment happens in phases using risk prioritization. So high risk food will be checked first, and then low risk food will be checked second, in a second moment, because we already might have evidence that it wouldn't have as much of a risk.
Eli,
Yes.
don't you think it's a contradiction saying that you genuinely believe that the historical consumption and proof isn't a good criterion to identify whether a food is safe or not, and then you're basing your entire model onto it and saying that proportionality is based on this historical consumption, the proof that you find in the market?
We aren't saying that proportionality is based on how the food is viewed by the historical consumption. We are saying that there are some foods that we know have different type of ingredients or different type of treatments that have a higher probability of having toxicology risks through the ones we already have, like as traditional foods, that we know some foods have these risks higher than other type of foods. As my first speaker brought, there's an example of licorice that was used in very little portions in the years previous, whereas now that is implemented in a lot of candies can be toxical and bring harm to, for example, the hormonal system of our body because it's taken in bigger quantities. Then your second speaker brought that, no thank you, that there is no problem. The most of the problems is in how the food is handled, and also said that the regulation that she brought as a counter model, there are other regulation that that it's not part of the no motion, but that's okay, I'll revert it anyway. Those regulations, she said clearly, that do not check the chemical composition of the food. But isn't that a contradiction? If those regulations are enough, shouldn't they check every aspect of the food and not just some aspects. That is why we are trying to implement the no thank you, the already present assessment on food through all food rather than only the novel ones, because clearly the ones that are already in the regulation don't work enough. Then she accept the opposition as us accept that the status quo can be improved, but then she doesn't accept our way of improving and actually just states that the status quo works, saying that the regulations that already are there works. But sorry, if you recognize that this should be bettered, why are you saying, oh yeah, but we proposed the regulation that are already there, so they're already working, so it shouldn't there be any problem? Now I would like to go with my second point, that is about the fact that the mandatory assessment ensures transparency, fairness, and consumers' trust. Requiring all foods to undergo the EFSA safety assessment is essential to restore fairness, transparency, and trust in the EU food system, which the current framework systematically undermines. The current system is inconsistent because it fails both safety and trust, because they are not treating all the foods and they're leaving some foods out that, as we said before, can bring harm through toxicology, for example. Extending the safety assessment on all foods that we brought in the model would go through review and update mechanism, reassessment that are periodically updated as science evolves, so new evidence triggers targeted reevaluation. This is in this way is not static, but rather dynamic. As she said, like the school evolved through time, the same thing should be with the assessment on food. Novel foods must undergo full assessment and provide detailed labeling, including toxicology, allergenity, and nutritional content. While foods on the market before 1997, even if widely consumed today, are largely unassessed under modern standards. The problem is that consumers have no reliable way to know whether a traditional food is genuinely safe. Historical consumption is treated as an assumption of safety because we don't have any other tools, which ignores modern production changes and evolving scientific understanding. Now, the consumers face unequal information. Under the current system, information about the same type of risk is only provided for novel foods, while a mandatory assessment creates uniform safety standards and labeling, assuring all foods to disclose known toxicology risks, allergenity, nutritional content, and interaction with modern processing and packaging. This eliminates the information asymmetry, where people know more about novel foods than what would they eat every day. So this allows consumers to make informed decisions. Now, restoring trust, no thank you, and fairness. Consistent evidence-based regulation builds public confidence in institutions. Treating all food equally ensures fairness among producers because no legacy product gain an advantage by avoiding update safety checks, and producers are incentivized to maintain safe practice, knowing all competitors follow the same rules. For example, licorice-based candies were historically consumed in small amounts without issue, but modern concentrated forms in supplements and drinks have caused cases of hypertension. So only a transparent, updated assessment and labeling allows consumers to avoid unexpected harm. Another example of this is the nitrates in processed meat, were long assumed safe based on historical diets, but modern research reveals links to cancer, for example. So a uniform labeling and safety assessment would have informed customers earlier, preventing harm and restoring trust in food safety. What are the impacts of the as argument? People trust consumer confidence. So people trust that every food product has undergone through a science-based evaluation. Confidence encourages healthier dietary choice. Fairness among producers, so eliminates arbitrary advantages for foods that bypass modern testing due to historical assumption, and then promotes a level playing field for all companies and encourages safer production methods, and also systemic legitimacy. Ensures food authorities that are perceived as credible and consent. That's the end of my speech. Thank you.
8 minutes and 7 seconds. Okay, Maria and Carlo, okay? So we can go to the second speaker from opposition team, Francesca. Anyone, Francesca, you can start.
Yeah. Okay, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Hi, everybody. I'll first have to start by rebutting some of the things that were said by the proposition team, and then I'll move to my argumentations. The first thing I wanted to address were some things that we have stated that the proposition team has shaped, but that weren't exactly what we have stated. So I would like to really make you understand what we stand for. The first thing that the proposition stated is that we said that the status quo works. That's not what we've stated. We've stated that the status quo can be implemented, and that's exactly why our main goal is to simply be implementing the already existing regulations instead of overworking a system that is specifically tailored to fit a small amount of foods and that is going to instead crush, and therefore the big safety that the proposition team is presenting to us today won't be reached by far, but the opposite will actually happen. And then the second thing, the one specifically about the regulation that we've mentioned and that already exists and that already is proven to be working, the official control regulation by the European Union. They said that this regulation does not check the foods in terms of chemicality. It actually does. It's not just the chemical composition. That is instead what the EFSA is doing. Basically, I'm going to explain to you this quicker because I think this needs to be quite understood. The EFSA, what it does, it is just simply makes a shot and a picture of how the food is chemically made at that exact moment. Whereas what the official control regulation checks, maybe more sporadically, but what it exactly checks isn't just the chemical composition, but also all the other aspects of the chain. Therefore, the packaging that could have metals in it. Therefore, no, thank you. Therefore, also the production, how it is distributed. This is actually, there is a data that I'm going to cite to you today from the Rapid Alert System for Food and Feed, the RSSFF, that says that in 2024 and 2025, the overwhelming majority of food safety alerts in the EU were triggered by pathogenic microorganism and pesticide residues rather than the inherent toxicity of the food substance itself. Therefore, the EFSA isn't really addressing the real problem with food. That is what we both agreed on, what we both agreed it needs to be implemented. It is simply making a photo of what the chemical composition of all foods, basically overwhelming what the EFSA is actually there for, just because they do not see the point into the historical consumption and they do not know how to actually have a fair proportionality. About the proportionality, now that we're there, actually, wait, I would first like to start and counterbattle some things that were said by the second speaker, the two argumentations. The first one about market fairness and innovation. What I would like to underline here about the EFSA is another very important thing, is that the chemical studies that need to be sent from the industries to the EFSA needs to be paid for by the producer. If I produce something, I need to pay for the chemical controls, and then I need to send it to the EFSA. Now, do you think that every single food in every single part of the world, every single food producer is going to be able to afford these costs? Do you know how much this is? So actually, what is going to happen isn't one second, isn't a policy that helps startups. It just basically kills the small scale traditional farmers and small producers. this leads to monopolium. I'm going to explain to you this better because that's actually an argumentation, but this is really important to underline here. This is not market safe fairness. This just simply exacerbates and makes even worse monopolium. And then consumer trust. That's simply not true. Consumers wouldn't trust these things because if you're going to realize that some products are unsafe, right? And the FSA is going to be overworked. It's going to be so slow. It won't be able to fix all the things at the same time. So basically what happens is that a few products won't be on the market anymore. 1 second. So a few products won't be on the market anymore. The costs of the products that are there are going to rise up. Also, how we've proven to you today, the problem isn't just chemicals, but other aspects. And therefore, there are still going to be debts and problems with food. So what a consumer is going to see is high prices, is going to see still people dying from food issues. And then they're going to see basically that the government is spending funds somewhere else entirely that is not working. They're going to lose trust on the European Union itself. So this is an entire argument that isn't truthful. I'll now move to my argumentations. The first argument that I want to bring to you today is exactly this: the unfairness to small businesses and consumers. I'm going to read something to you. Small and medium-sized enterprises are central to Europe's economic and social fabric. The 24 million European SMEs represent 99% of all businesses in the EU. They are Europe's breeding ground for innovation, diversity, and equality. This is an extract of EU communication of Strasbourg. But what I wanted to underline here with this extract is just how important small and medium food industries are to the European Union and how omnipresent on the market they are, 99%. Now, you see all these positive aspects that I've just cited. Well, they're going to be demolished by the action of the proposition team. Why is that? So as we know, the European Novel Food Assessment requires expensive toxicological data, allergenicity, etc., etc. So now for a multinational corporation, these costs are affordable. But put yourselves in the shoes of a traditional cheesemonger, right? The cost of generating such a dossier is way too high. Small businesses would be forced to withdraw products or shut down entirely, not because their food is unsafe, but because compliance is unaffordable. And as a result, first of all, we would be losing a significant amount of cultural tradition. Second of all, the monopolium of big, already affirmed industries would increase. Third, competition would decline, which would reduce innovation altogether. And fourth, prices would rise because there'd be more demand for a lesser amount of products. And this would again be unfair to consumers because if healthy, traditional foods become a luxury to these regulatory costs, consumers will pivot towards ultra-processed and low-cost alternatives, and this impacts their health. So ultimately, this motion and the position that the proposition team is assuming causes more harm than good and must be opposed. And then the second one, argumentation about the misdiagnosis of modern food risks. What are the real causes of modern food risk? Well, first of all, microbiological dangers, pathogens, etc. Second, packaging and migration. So microplastics that migrate into the food during storage. And third, supply chain failures, temperatures abuse during shipping or cross-contamination in factories. The Novel Food Assessment does not monitor these variables. It is a one-time snapshot of a product's chemical composition. But once a food passes this test, it doesn't stop a worker from failing to wash their hands or a refrigerator from breaking down. An example, a recent massive recall for a food that's called Cereulide, I hope I pronounced it correctly, was because of traceability failures, not because of a lack of a pre-market novel food assessment. At one time, chemical profile of that baby food performed years ago would have done absolutely nothing to prevent a bacteria-driven recall today. And this addresses also the example with corn that was made by the first speaker of the proposition team. What the proposition team is doing is they are prescribing a toxicological cure for a pathological and systemic disease. If we adopt their motion, we are essentially forced to spend billions of euros reproving that flour is safe to eat, while the actual pathogens go under monitored due to a lack of resources that could have been spent in an active inspection like we have proposed to you today. I concluded my speech.
8 minutes and 21 seconds. Okay, Carlo and Maria are okay? Carlo is okay. Maria, she's okay. Okay, very good. So we can go to Marina, third speaker from
Okay.
competition team.
Yeah. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, perfectly. Then I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. The moment they recognize there is a problem with the current food regulations, they lose this debate. Pauline, I want just to adjust something real quick before starting. The second speaker opposition said that she was going to take our PI, then she ended up forgetting probably. So I will just like to say, like, just quick at the start, and then I'll later explain why is this important. What I wanted to tell to ask the second speaker opposition is why does she think that the regulation they want to implement won't cost any money while ours will inevitably just make the market collapse? Now, going back, I usually do my speeches bringing clashes, but it was really difficult to find those because they just brought what we brought, but saying that our doesn't work, but for some reason there does. So what are actually the clashes? First of all, historical consumption. Is historical consumption a safe check method? I think we highly proved you why it is not. For example, let's just take an example. I can't go around with a map that was used 100 years ago because obviously it is outdated and it doesn't actually lead to correct places. That same thing goes for food. I can't just expect things to be as safe as they were before. First of all, as my first speaker explained, the number, like the consumption there is different. We consume more thing now. We eat more than we used to. And also we are actually evolving, but it's like not, it's just like the way the world is evolving, we can't just pretend that it's so safe and just perfect. But at the same time, and I want to highlight this, we said in our model that EFSA regulation will not just be equal to everyone. Like, of course they're equal, but what I'm trying to tell you is that they're based on risk. So if we know, and know is knowledge based on scientific fact and not just some historical thing that we believe it's true, but then understand that it's not, but something that is science proven to be low risk, then that of course will have less, I'll take that later, and it will have less less regulations, or like it will be as considered as low risk, so not as high regulation as the others, but it will still be regulated. Also, what they're trying to tell you is that some way the method they're implementing won't cost any money to the small businesses. I'm sorry, that would be totally amazing, but it's a bit utopical. Everything costs money in this world. So even if their laws implementation, their checkings, the way they do things, it will still cost money. So I like, yeah, it will cost money, and I'm sorry, but they divert, like the gap between our method and their method is actually not that big. But what is big, the safety of the food that is consumed. We provide better safety. They also, the second speaker opposition spent a lot of time trying to tell us why the regulation that already exists are nearly enough, but I wonder why is that exclusive to them. Like the fact that they still work correctly is good, okay, but we also will still use those regulations. We will just implement them with the EFSA regulation to make it more safe. Because if they also understood that it's not perfect, that the method is not perfect, that means that it needs improvement. Those improvements can be found in the EFSA regulation. And also, she stated that the EFSA regulations that just says yes, you can say no.
You stated that you're going to have a proportionality based on scientific evaluation, and then you're going to have a scientific evaluation based on this proportionality. So what are you doing? Are you evaluating every single food, and then based on this scientific evaluation, you're going to make a ranking of things that need to be approved by the FSA?
Everything, okay. Thank you for the question. I will just explain it briefly, but my first speaker already kind of explained how that works. So I will just go through like really briefly. I don't want to lose that much time. But what I'm trying to say is, yes, of course, like you first need to assess which food can, like there still need to be regulation, but in the long term, like you're still controlling, but then there are some things that obviously need more control, so you're controlling that one more. So extra regulation are still applied, but on some ends they're done it more carefully, we can say. But of course that just happens. Like we can't just pretend that meat is the same as pasta and is the same as rice, but that doesn't mean that they don't have to go through like regulation that are at least similar one to another. So as I said, the regulation that already exists won't just go away, and EFSA doesn't just control the final point, it actually controls all the steps in between, as my first speaker actually explained, and nobody said anything about that, so I believe that's true. Also, so which model is actually better? They are trying to push a model that they believe being better than ours, but actually it's the same. The only difference between their model and our model is that in our model you control the chemicals better, and that is so important, because at a cost that I think will be nearly the same, you will have chemicals that are more controlled, and then you will have more safety. Also, you told us that you will actually undermine trust with our method. You would actually undermine trust with our method, but how would that work? Why would your implementation, why wouldn't they undermine trust if that's how you think? But anyway, I think I would trust a product more if it just has more regulation to it, and I know it has gone through more safety assessment. And also, like you said, the small business will shut down, but eventually, but with your method, as I stated before, you will still spend money. So they will probably just shut down anyway, if we want to believe that in our case we'll shut down, but the cost won't be that high. The nation will support that cost as well. So as I would say, difference between their method and our method is that we control more. And yeah, so another thing is the trust. As I said, as I tried to state it, the trust is so important, of course. And why would I trust something that has less regulation rather than something that has more of them? And yeah, you also talked about a risk-based approach, and that's like just the way they're trying to tell you, yes, there is a problem, but not really, but there is, but we have to find a way. While us, proposition, we think it's important to analyze the chemicals and the reason and the chemicals of the food. It's important to analyze whether our food is safe or not. It's better to have more regulamentations than have less, and then having people being sick. And so we believe that our model is the best way to actually assure that, because why are we trying to implement new laws? So creating a new system that will take time to think about the new system, time to implement it, cost to implement it, if we can just take a system that we already know it works, because we know that with novel food it works, and just applied it to everyone with maybe small changes, but little small changes. That is not like making a new entire model that will actually take more time, more energy, and more money. So that's why, for all these reasons, I've never been bothered to propose. That's the end of my speech.
8 minutes and 4 seconds. If Maria and Carlo are ready, yes, we can go to the third speaker from opposition team, Sofia. Please take the floor. Thank you.
I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. The pro side argues as if the world is on the brink of collapse, as if we are one meal away from catastrophe, and we are in regulatory anarchy, with no preventive rules, no safeguard in place. But that is simply false. We do not live in a food safety epidemic, nor in a system where foods are unregulated until the disaster strikes. The EU already has one of the most advanced preventive frameworks in the world. When harm occurs, it is overwhelmingly because of contamination, poor storage, transport failures, or actors that don't follow the existing rules. Not because the chemicals composition or of the long established foods were fundamentally unsafe. A chemically approved food can still be dangerous if it is mishandled. And this is where our regulation, the old regulation, must focus on. Our model does not weaken the regulation, but it enforces it. It strengthens it by broadening enforcement and addressing the real point of the failure. By contrast, the PROS model overworks the EFSA. It is like forcing a single emergency room to treat every citizen every year, just in case. Their health would not simply skyrocket or get better. The result is not better care, but the system worsens. It delays, and eventually it collapses. I want to address some of the contradiction and the points of clash that have emerged during this debate. First of all, first contradiction. You stated that only EFSA regulated chemicals. It does not have to do with only addresses the chemicals. But first of all, you don't know probably that the general food law that we asked to implement, that we want to better, actually works with the chemicals and it works with the whole process. So you're probably not aware of the fact that the EFSA actually focuses on only the chemical process, the chemical assimilation of a food, and not with all the packaging, all the contamination that the product, every product, is exposed to. Second contradiction, you, as the second speaker said, really blame the history consumption, but then at the same time, you base the reassessing on this historical consumption. So this is a real important contradiction. Then we really have to understand what the difference between the composition of the food and the contamination and the food that we actually get from the shelves is. So you can work on the composition of the food. You have the EFSA to do that, but the EFSA does not protect you in any way from all the other issues that the food can face before it is put into the shelves. So as you stated in the first speech, the nanoplastic, any other issue that is due to packaging, transport, anything like that. Then there was a big misunderstanding. As I already stated previously, the general food law does have to do with chemicals, and I wanted to answer that because I tried to ask you during POIs, but I didn't really have the chance to. So the general food law does, in fact, work with the chemicals. It checks them. We have to have this in mind. Points of clash. So point of clash. No, thank you. The science would constantly make the regulation change and adapt to the shift of society, as you stated. But do you understand that this would actually cause a vicious cycle and overwork the EFSA? That's what we were trying to say. You're overworking the EFSA because you keep running after these products that change and change and change. They're called novel products for a reason, because their chemicals always change. And because of science, you would have to actually spend a lot of money. The system would collapse because the assessment take time. No, thank you. The political funding is low. No, thank you. Can I please finish a sentence? And you are also stating that you want to do an assessment, to do then another assessment and give the food and let it be handled by the EFSA. So we didn't understand this. Second thing that you asked to better explain in the third speech is the consumer trust. So the consumer witnessed the reassessment that is coexisting with the danger, because it is not the chemical composition, but the packaging, distribution, and any other issue that is not related to the composition, the real problem that we want to address, that we are addressing. And at the same time, the customers would face a higher price because the small business have a hard time, because they have a hard time to actually exist and be on the shelves. And all the funds are actually given to implement the EFSA, and they have been utilized wrong. That's where the actual trust lacks. That's what I wanted to state. Then the equality of the producers. So another thing that we stated in the first speech, but you probably didn't really grasp, is the fact that we are funded, since we are relying on the general food law, we are funded by the states, while you are not. Your price has to be paid. I'll finish the sentence and I'll take the POI. You have to be funded. The small businesses itself have to be self-aware of the fact that they have to fund themselves. They have to find the money. But all the products, all the processes, in order to be accepted from the EFSA are real long. You have to find a center in order to actually certificate your food. You have to undergo many assessments. It is really hard. So we are funded by the state. We actually can fund the money, and we wouldn't face the issue. Why you would? But I'll take the POI right now.
And do you think the state has infinite money? And why wouldn't we be able to use the state money? We are implementing EFSA. Doesn't mean we have to still just rely on the state. Please engage on the small marketers. Please engage with that.
I didn't understand if I kind of understood the question right, but as I just said, we are funded by the states, but the EFSA, the concept of EFSA actually works like this. So it's the producer, the person that is producing the food, that has to pay every single step before actually getting on the shelf, being sold. And what we are relying on, what the authority that we are relying on, is the General Food Law by the European Union. So they would give us the funds. So we wouldn't face any crash in the system. We wouldn't have any issue, if that's the question. I hope I understood it. Then after assessing this, after explaining this, I wanted to say that you also said that the novel foods would actually be safer this way. So the novel foods, you probably don't understand that they are exposed to the same risk, and you're actually having an utopistic view, because the small businesses and the local producers would shut down, and it would increase monopoly, as my colleague said, and at the same time, the quality of the food would actually go terribly down. You, the person, the team that is trying to defend the safety and the health of a food, should know better than anyone that the actual quality of the food would go down. And you also said that you are only basing your solution on science, and you're not relying on any other we can say regulation that allows you to actually work on every single field and actually build a path in order to deliver a safe and healthy food to the consumers. So that's why we focus resources where the risk actually materializes. They drown the system in unnecessary reassessment. This is why our approach solves the problem more effectively than theirs. I concluded my speech.
8 minutes and 16 seconds. Okay, Carlo, are you okay? Maria, okay? Yeah, you are. So let's go to the last speaker for opposition team, Francesca, please.
Okay, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. We've come to the conclusion of this debate. I want to thank everybody for the thought-provoking debate. I think we both did great. My main job here is to, first of all, say one burden that wasn't followed by the proposition team. Then I'll move on to the points of clash that I've evaluated and I think we've come across throughout the entire debate, and ultimately give you a comparison of the two worlds that we've met. I'd like to start by this first. I think the main problem in this debate was the fact that the proposition team didn't really tell us in the very concretely how they're going to handle trillions of industries, how much time that's going to take, and since productive methods are ever evolving, should the same food get tested over and over again? This was completely lacking from the proposition team, and I think that's where the biggest misunderstandings have emerged. But apart from that, I think the main thing that we both have agreed on is how much safety is important, right? So we've both tried to prove to you how we're going to give safety into the food system. On one hand, throughout putting an entire system to collapse. And on the other hand, just trying to perfectionate the status quo and make it a better place for everybody. The 3 points of clash that I evaluated, the first one is the one about safety, right? As I stated before, I think it's the main value that we share in this debate. On one hand, the proposition team has stated that they control safety more because they see through the EFSA the chemical composition of the foods that they examine. But I hope we've proven to you today how, there are a lot of foods in the food chain, in the market, trillions of foods that will evolve over and over again. And also we've proven to you how the chemical composition, unfortunately, isn't the only problem in the status quo. And therefore, this would only lead to a system that collapses since it was tailored for a few amount of people, a few amount of products. And ultimately, you won't even fix the problem in its entirety because the chemicals are not the only problem. On the other hand, we've tried to prove to you today how safety can be improved, can be granted more freely with already existing regulations so as to not submerge with bureaucracy anyone, and implementing them a lot. And this way, considering chemical composition, hygiene conditions, storage and temperature control, transport and distribution, and blah, blah, blah. So many other different aspects that we are taking into consideration today. This actually grants more safety. The second one is about market and consumer trust. On one hand, the proposition team has stated that there's going to be more market fairness, more innovation, and consumers are going to trust the market more. On the other hand, I hope we've proven to you today how actually, since the costs of the EFSA need to be handled by the single small industry, they are not going to be able to afford actually doing this, and they're going to retire the products from the market, leaving consumers with less healthy foods and also higher costs. So actually, consumers won't trust the system more. They're only going to be let down. And the third point of clash about costs, right? We both mentioned costs. Now, unfortunately, the funds aren't infinite. I mean, we wish. On one hand, though, the proposition team needs to find a way to make space for trillions of products into a system that wasn't made for them. And on the other hand, what we're doing is just simply giving more funds to the member states to do controls and regulations. So I think economically, we've tried to prove to you how this is more likable to happen. And ultimately, we have two worlds. The world of the EFSA for everybody with collapse, overworking because it's tailored for smaller producer, for smaller numbers. The food that really needs help can't be helped because it would be like an emergency room filled with every person just in case people not receiving the help that they need. A market with monopoly and ultimately more harm than good. And on the other hand, our world is a world of implementation. And the worst case scenario is just that things remain the way they are. But with hope, we can, implement things for the better. And thank you. I concluded my speech.
4 minutes and 20 seconds. Okay, Maria and Carlo, are you okay? So we can go to the very last speaker of this debate, Laura. Please, Laura, take the floor. Thank you.
Okay, so if everybody can hear me, my reply will start in 3, 2, 1. Opposition like to say that we don't have time and money, but when they bring their model, they have infinite time and infinite money. Maybe opposition model would work in a Disney movie. So thank you for this debate. I would like to do my reply, but first I would like to congratulate the other team. I would like to analyze contradiction and the strategically flaws of opposition, and later I will analyze the model since it was the main point of our debate. So there were a lot of contradiction and flaws in the strategy of opposition. The first contradiction was that they stated that the checks that EFSA wants to do will take so much time since they are checking so many things. But later they stated that EFSA does not check enough things and it doesn't bring a solution. And like they kind of created a utopic world. They like to say that something does not work since it takes time, money, etc. But they continuously proved that when they are presented with a model which is structured and proved that can work efficiently, they can rebut and attack facts. So honestly, if a debate worked and can be won just by saying that something didn't work, like just rebutting saying it doesn't work, we would have saved a lot of time on research and mechanization. And also opposition wasn't really fair on their side because they did not engage with our model and case, just said it didn't work and ignored completely the point of fairness and consumer trust. It was only brought in the reply. And also they asked a lot of POIs that were 20-25 seconds long, so like kind of blocking our speeches. And then a second contradiction was they stated that the status quo works, then it doesn't, then it works, then it doesn't. Like they manipulated the narrative and changed what FSA actually checks. So how can opposition bring a model that works if they can't get a narrative straight? And then the third contradiction was that the third speaker started the speeches by saying that pro is acting like the situation is crucial and we need to act in the most total way possible. But then what is the point of even bringing a model? If your model worked, it wouldn't be even necessary to do a debate. But apparently it doesn't. And that's why you should stand with proposition. And then I would like to, at the end, analyze the models. So like EFSA and their model analyze the same things, but the chemicals is the part that is actually dangerous. Proposition brought a lot of examples, like the licorice one, that when it's taken in small part, it doesn't damage someone, but when it's taken in a small, high percentage, it can actually damage someone. And this actually wasn't rebutted by opposition, and also the proposition stated that they can overlap, so it's difficult to identify it. So the model will take time, since they will need to completely update laws that already exist to make them even work. And even if they created a whole new system, it wouldn't work, since it doesn't actually tackle the issues, since it doesn't actually analyze the chemicals that as Proposition House, we analyze and explain why that's crucial. The part the opposition completely ignored is demonstrating why their model solves the problem and why they have like priority, like why it works only on their side. But as proposition, we stated and we proved how it's necessary to use FSA laws. And then, as I said before, they contradicted themselves constantly. They brought a model that is not layered. They didn't explain it deeply, but it works perfectly because they use risk-based and proportionality, and it works. But if we use a model based on risk-based and proportionality, it does not work. So not rebutting or demonstrating anything. So that's the end of my reply. Thank you.
4 minutes and 2 seconds. You know that you have to do one important thing now, yeah? I suggest, please, to open up your microphones and to clap your hands, because this is what we have to do. Okay? So, okay, stop recording. Okay, stop recording now. Yes, very good.